Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this lightning talk. So we're going to have 4 inspirational stories that demonstrate that skills change lives. We haven't got so many people in the room at the moment, so I wonder if some of you who are sitting a little bit more towards the back would like to move forward so we're all closer to each other, we can have more of a dialogue and more of an interaction with each other. And I know that the Be Changemaker pictures and awards are going on next door, so perhaps we'll get more people in just a few moments when the winner of that is announced. So thank you so much for joining us. My name's Crispin Thorold. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for World Skills International, and it's a real honor to be moderating this panel. We've got 4 people from very different backgrounds who are doing incredibly interesting things with skills. And before I introduce them, I just wanted to sort of say, by way of introduction, one of the things I love about my job and I love about my involvement with World Skills is that every single young skilled professional has an inspiring story about how their lives are being changed through that skill. And you really just have to walk into all the halls where the competitions are going on at the moment and talk to anyone, and you'll hear a massively inspiring story. But we're lucky that we have particularly inspiring stories here. You're going to hear about how renewable energy is being brought to remote communities on the Thai border. You'll hear about kruzhoks, circles, associations where young talent is being developed in Russia. You're going to hear about work with indigenous communities to learn both about their skills, but also to help them to develop their skills for the Western world, for the world that's around their communities. And you're also going to hear about how refugees are working in a language app to support online language training. So a kind of real diverse series of stories, but all of them in their own way inspiring. We're joined very briefly, I'll introduce them and then in more detail before they speak, by Shalini Hurley, who's an electrical engineer and social entrepreneur from Thailand, by Aleksey we practiced that a few times beforehand, who's from Russia, and an education specialist who's worked in IT for 10 years, by Abigail Fulton from British Columbia in Canada, is a lawyer by training, and she has worked on the demand side a lot, supporting industry training and apprenticeship for the skilled trades. And then finally from Marcel from the UK, originally from Afghanistan, who's a social and tech entrepreneur. Again, because we don't have loads and loads of people in the room, I'd like to keep the format quite open. Each of the speakers will present briefly, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation with each of them individually, and please at that stage do ask any questions that you may have. So let's start with Shalini. Shalini, to give you a summary of some of her background. Studied her master's in solar energy engineering at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell, and then she returned to Thailand to lead the Border Green Energy team, which provides renewable energy technology to underprivileged communities along the Thailand-Burma border. And then in 2013, she founded Sun Sawang, a social enterprise that delivers solar-powered products and services to rural Thailand. Shalini, thank you.
It is too difficult and costs too much money to install high-voltage power line. Friend villages, Burmese migrant communities, refugee camps, and internally displaced person sites in Myanmar. For several years, though, I came to realize that distributing solar and water power generation systems for free was doing more harm than good. So this system needs routine maintenance by the local people. However, the systems were stopped working because people didn't feel the need to pay for maintenance on things they receive for free. It was difficult for me to accept the mistakes I had made by distributing free electricity. But it was more difficult to continue doing something that I knew was setting myself up for failure. So I asked myself, what can be done differently for our projects to be sustainable over time? The answer was ownership. When something belongs to you, you take ownership and responsibility for that. And people have to pay for something to own it. So we decided to launch a pilot project, asking people to partially pay for their solar equipment and maintenance. We also hire the local people and train them to be our technicians to maintain and install solar power systems. With no previous business skills, I worked hard to write a business plan and learn things from scratch. I searched for opportunities on how to set up a social business and found ways to attend business incubating and mentorship programs. However, transforming a non-profit organization into a social business is extremely challenging. With peer pressure, staff resistance, and negative responses from the communities, I had to work even harder to prove that the business model and social enterprise idea worked. Finally, the pilot projects proved to be successful, and we set up a social business to carry on this work. Now, we are able to provide even broader solutions to these communities with larger solar systems to power refrigerators, lights, and other appliances that can increase their income. Children are motivated to study at night. People have access to entertainment thanks to TVs and radios. Their health has improved because they no longer inhale the smoke from candles or kerosene lamps. Local people earn extra income by becoming our technicians. As a social business today, we are in a much better position to address the needs of the people we have always tried to reach. My work challenges me to learn business skills, financial skills, and people skills. I continue learning by also transferring these skills to our staff and technicians. These skills then transform their life and give them dignity. I have found my passion in using engineering skills to deliver energy and electricity to the last mile. And what are your passions? And how can those passions become skills to share with others? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a wonderful story, and I guess when I was listening to that, there were a couple of things that skills development. So there's two kind of sides to this coin, that you're using skills to improve prospects for people. So can you talk a little bit about both of those, and especially this development of skills within the community that you're working with?
So the people we work with is really have their own languages and cultural. So but our staff are also speak the same languages. Chances to receive formal education because they lack of electricity. So I'm not quite sure if...
Yeah, no, so then you're coming in and you're teaching them new skills that they can then use to improve their own prospects.
Yeah.
And how has the response within the community been to that?
Like I mentioned at the beginning, we went into the village and then offer stuff for free, right? And they accept it because everyone wants free stuff, right? But at the end, we realized that the free stuff become trash in the village. So that's why I have to come back and ask myself, what did we do wrong, right? So that's why the idea of coming up with ownership and then asking them to be part of this project by paying for the equipment and also for the maintenance, where we also hire the local people who live in the village and can maintain the systems over time. And then they're paying off for the equipment over time as well, like 5 years. So they be able to afford this equipment. So in the end, like, we can continue doing this, and also they can continue using the systems over time, and everything seemed to work out really well.
Great, thank you. And would anybody in the audience like to ask further questions about?
Many years. I wonder whether it actually worked.
Okay, I think the Muhammad Yunus, who started the Grameen Shakti, he started from the business side, right? But for me, I started from the non-profit side, that I've seen the free stuff fail. And I start to see like why people didn't value the things that they receive, right? And for me too, if I receive something free, it's worthless, right? So by thinking along that line, but also looking into like what's between conventional corporate business and between the nonprofit, like giving out free stuff. So there's got to be some answer for that. And that's how I found out about social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and start learning and start to look for programs that offer how to educate myself on this topic, and then use the idea of business and then kind of see what kind of business we can implement in these local and low-income communities. So that's how I started.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you for your story, and I want to continue with topic of ownership. And my question is, do this community that now own and pay for electricity and support of system, this community can also participate in management of this project, or and develop their understanding of management such projects, or it just paid for electricity and that's all. Thank you.
So the part that we have technicians. So these technicians, they live in their community. So we don't look for people from outside. So we look for people who live in the community and then recruit them and then train them on how to maintain the systems and also pay them the salary. So they basically our employees. Yeah.
Great, many thanks. And I think that idea of learning from each other, which I'm very glad that you raised, is something that leads us very nicely into Aleksey. Aleksey has done all sorts of things, and we're going to be hearing from him about the krushoks that he set up, particularly around kind of technology. And this is a concept that I wasn't personally aware of before, but that has been around in Russia for at least 100 years in social contexts, in political contexts, and it's all about a kind of group, a circle of people coming together and learning from each other and helping each other. Aleksey has done all sorts of things since he was graduated from the Bauman Moscow State University in 2005. He's worked in IT for more than 10 years. He's the president of the Krushok Association. He's also deeply involved with World Skills Juniors as well, the competitions where you can see young school children practicing their skills nice and early here at World Skills Kazan 2019. So please, Aleksey.
Thank you very much. Actually, yesterday I was here in the session 5 inspiration stories from teenagers, and I was wondering what session will be more popular. It's not fair challenge, actually. Yes, we discussed it. But now I see that we still live in the world where the 5 inspiration stories from adults is more popular than 5 inspiration stories for teenagers, and that's the thing we trying to change.
Although they may, to be fair, they may all have been in Be Changemaker next year with door with young people, so you never know. But it's a very fair point.
And that's the story we are running, and for me it was very interesting to go this way because I was lucky to change different professional roles in my life. I was working in information technologies and computer science, and I was lucky to work in different organizations, from corporations to startups. And but after that, I found that even if IT and computer science skills are very global, actually, so you run projects with people from different continents, and you talk with them every day, and etc. But actually, you are very limited by technologies. So when you want to change something really in the world, you need to deal with people, not just with technologies. And that's why I moved to educational sphere, and I run the company creating educational tools with connecting with information technologies. And after that, together with my colleagues and friends, we started to understand that it's not enough to have one company. You need an ecosystem, actually, of different participants of different roles. And after that, we decided to go with this technological enthusiasm in our country, and started this non-government organization, and several big projects connected with it. So why we call it Kruzhok? I think that for Russian audience it's pretty simple and clear, but for international audience I will introduce this social concept. Actually, as you said, we have very long story of this social concept. Kruzhok is actually, this word namely means circle, but actually it means club, technological clubs, clubs of poets and philosophers and even revolutionaries, all this. It was a really significant cultural trend in the beginning of 20th century, and it was continued by Soviet government, and we had many well-known engineers and scientists like Perelman, mathematician, or Korolev, engineer, or Sikorsky, and many well-known people, not just in Russia, actually were participated in kruzhoks or created such clubs. And that was very inspiring for us because well, we know all these heroes of the previous times and why we cannot recreate it. And actually, it's not a Russian phenomenon. We know makers in United States and other countries, and makers community is pretty similar, pretty similar idea. And we start to run this ecosystem of kruzhoks because it's not about creating from top to down. You cannot create a club of enthusiasts. You just can encourage people to run it by themselves, and that's why we started to support these activities. But the main thing for us is that it's not just about learning skills and technologies. It's about running projects and running projects for that will help people. For instance, running projects to help people with disabilities, or using information technologies to help people who is surviving and looking for lost people in the wilderness. So if you have technologies which can save people's lives and can be applied to these particular topics, it's great to encourage young people to do it. And we run hackathons, we run competitions, we run specific, we support specific projects and places where people can, young people can run their own projects. And this is actually about responsibility of skills. So you, as being young people, being a young person, you start to be responsible for your own skill and your technology. We are trying to go global, and we try to solve global problems like deforestation or fires in Amazonian area and Siberia. We have the same, actually, we have the same problems in many countries, and that's why even if you try to solve local problem, you need to have global mind. You need to be global in your projects and ideas. And sharing these ideas and creating international teams is our goal, actually, because it's a very significant step. And I should say that when you working with such communities, you need to be between education, business, and social activists. So you need to unite very different cultures, very different groups, and I think that this is a strong point, because when you want to learn something, you need to understand why you are doing this. And several words about the WorldSkills community, because we have very strong connection with WorldSkills community in Russia. Not just juniors competitions you mentioned, but it's very significant. If you want to do something, changing the world, you need to have skills to do this. And that's why WorldSkills community is a community of skills learners and skills experts, is very big support for us. Also, the things we are doing is about professional guidance. So when you try to apply your skills, you have a chance to understand that it's not yours. It's not your skill. And as sooner you understand it, it's better for your personal trail, and we try to make this together with WorldSkills Russia as well. We run professional guidance projects like Ticket to the Future and other projects which help many young people change their professional life and find their skills. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And one of the things we were talking about when we gathered just before was the kind of the connectivity between skills in the past and skills in the future. And I'm interested as well that this concept of the circle is a relatively old idea, but you're using it in a very kind of high-tech setting.
Actually, I think that it's almost the same, because when we read the books, the stories of first rocket engineers in Soviet Russia, we see that they was at the age of technologies, actually, of that time. So I think that's very parallel things. Every generation we have new technologies, and people who are on the age of these technologies trying to apply it to real problems around them.
And of course now, huge change. Huh?
Yeah.
And coming up. Okay, fantastic. Anyone from the audience like to ask Aleksey some more questions about these Khrushchevs? Yes, please, sir. Yeah. Just get you a microphone just here. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Grigory Brezgin. Gazprom Transgaz Ukhta. I'm a technical guy. I deal with the transport of natural gas. Aleksey, I liked very much what you do. This is a wonderful, brilliant project. Right now, I'm undergoing a course, a mentorship course, mentorship training. My question is, what are you doing these days? What are your goals? What are your targets in this field, maybe other fields? What are you going to do in the near term?
Should I answer in English, Russian?
As you like.
Okay. You have translation. Was is перевод? I think that it's primarily a national question, actually, because yes, we have big national activity. We have National Technology Initiative contest and another big activities in Russia. And if you like, we can discuss it after the session. I think it will be good. But the main challenge for us now, and as I said before, is not just to be national project. Because when you try to change something, when you want to bring new technologies, new experts, new challenges, you need to be global. And it's not so easy in Russia today, because we have very complex political situation around and many other complexities. But I think that this is the next step for all of us. I mean, Russian educational community, Russian non-formal educational community, because if we cannot go abroad, if we cannot make something comparable with other countries, we will not grow. So this is the biggest challenge for us now, I think.
Perfect.
There was one hand.
Yeah, please.
Спасибо.
Thank you. First of all, many thanks for such compelling information. I represent a project of the Center of Graphical Culture in the national track. And I did hear about things we are aspiring to and searching for. We don't have the notion of graphical culture in Russia, and I think in the world as well. I'm a technical led. I was a chief professor in Bauman University. I was the regional expert of the first Moscow competition in the junior skills. I'm working with kids. I started first with university students, and then I went to the kindergarten level. The technique, the methodic has been worked through. 30 years of search had their result. And I think something needs to be changed. The graphical education needs to be changed. And the 3D modeling, that is an integral part, should become the basic skill. The skill like speaking and writing in Russian, 3D should become the same basic skill. For it, we need the global education reform. And I personally have worked in the extracurricular education, and I was also engaged in the cultural amusement activities. My question is simple. How do we establish cooperation and further develop our activities?
It's pretty easy to start after the session and exchange with business class. So it's not about, a complex question, and yes, we will find something together, sure.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Aleksey. And I think one of the things we didn't discuss is that a lot of your work is taking place in industrial zones, and you're very kind of focused on industrial zones, although there is some work in more rural communities. But our next speaker, Abigail Fulton, does a lot of work, especially in rural communities in beautiful British Columbia in Canada, with the indigenous population. She's the executive director of the Construction Foundation, an organization that's focused on building the next generation of skilled workers. Her background is with working with industry and government on regulatory and policy issues impacting the construction industry. And she's going to talk to us today, particularly about that work within those indigenous populations. Thank you, Abigail.
Well, I'm going to stand. Works better for me when I stand. And I'm going to go in a slightly different direction than what you've heard so far. I'm going to go into the past. 400 years ago, my 10 times great-grandfather, William Bradford was his name, got on a ship with his family and set sail to the New World. They were on a ship called the Mayflower. And they had big visions of their future. They were going to change their lives. They were going to develop new skills. They were going to be a new nation on the shores of North America. Well, they didn't have the best information. They had some fake news, I guess you'd call it. They believed that because the shores of North America were at a more southerly latitude than southern England and the Netherlands, that they were coming to a warm climate. And they landed about 6 weeks before winter hit with pretty much no food. So they landed on the shores of North America, and within 3 months, half of them were dead. They had starved or picked up diseases, and the other half were going to go the same way in a very short period of time. The only reason they didn't is because the indigenous population of North America came to their rescue. They taught them skills. They taught them how to hunt. They taught them how to grow corn, ultimately. They taught them how to survive in the new environment that they had come to. And they did it willingly. And looking back 400 years later, there are some of them in Canada today who might have regretted that decision to share. There have been a lot of historic injustices impacting our indigenous nations, but I'm not going to get into that today. What I am going to say is that thanks to the skills of those indigenous people, I'm standing here today. If they hadn't stepped up and shared their skills, I wouldn't have survived. So I know that I personally owe a huge debt of gratitude to those indigenous people. So fast forward 400 years, we have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, recognizing their knowledge, particularly around sustainability, and affirming their inherent rights. That's great. We also have the UN Sustainability Goals, which you no doubt all know about. Canada's adopted them, the 2030 Agenda, which is to leave no people behind. Well, I'm going to challenge you to look at that a little differently, because I don't think it's about leaving them behind. I think we need to make sure that they don't leave us behind. When we look at developing skills I think there's much to be learned from people who've been around a certain environment far longer than we have. And with the Indigenous people, they can teach us not only how to learn skills, but why we're learning skills. And I've had the incredible privilege since coming to the west coast of Canada, to British Columbia, to be able to work with a number of Indigenous communities. They've invited our organization in to learn about their communities, their cultures, their traditions, and it's an honor. And while originally now I had several decades working with industry, particularly on workforce development programs that worked with underutilized groups who needed help to get into the trades. And you can't help but take that bias when you go into a rural or a remote area with a completely different culture, with an Indigenous culture. You're thinking in your mind, oh, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to help them. I'm going to teach them about the trades, I'm going to help them get jobs. Well, quite honestly, they've been teaching me and the people that I work with. So first thing to remember that I've learned from Indigenous communities is they're incredibly competent. It's how they learn. So they learn through observation, they learn through experience. What we heard yesterday at the keynote address about trial and error, they've been doing that for 12,000 years. They've got a whole history and tradition of trial and error on how to exist and survive in this world. Very competent. They also transfer that knowledge. They have an oral tradition. The elders transfer their knowledge forward to their youth. And that intergenerational transfer is in many cases lost, I find, at least in our, I'll call it, Western world. So they learn by experience, they pass on that experience, and they're incredibly competent. They also exist in community. Community is incredibly important to the Indigenous nations that I've had the privilege of meeting. They don't dominate, they work together. They're subservient to the environment around them, and they come together to support. They're active listeners. When they work with youth, the entire community supports a young person as they grow and they learn. It's not just a teacher, it's everybody in the community. It's their responsibility to support that young person. And I think, again, something that would be great to see more of in the Western world. And when they learn skills, they don't just, it's not just learning skills, there's meaning to what they're doing. When they create something, and I mentioned this yesterday in another session, the art is very important, but any piece of art, if it's going to be accepted and considered good art, it has to be useful. So everything they do has a use, but it also has a meaning. They infuse their myths, their stories, their traditions in the symbols when they create something. And it's a beautiful thing, frankly. Finally, sustainability is, of course, woven into their being. They don't just build things, they build them sustainably. This is a lodge. Now you'll notice the lodge is a community place where they go. It's infused with beauty. It's beautifully built, very competent. But the planks you see that built that lodge are carved out of trees. They don't kill the tree. They carve individual planks out of the trees to build their lodge. The tree keeps living. It's fascinating to see. And while that may not be possible all across the world, we can't necessarily get enough lumber by just carving out planks from trees, it's the concept behind it that I think is incredibly valuable, that we need to learn from. Their knowledge is circular. They don't just learn something and throw it away. They think long term. They're here to stay. They build relationships, not just with people. They have relationships with the water, with the land, with the air. And they believe that their purpose here on Earth is to look after all of that. Their community includes everything in their environment. And again, it's something I believe we need to learn. So here I am now today, not I'm telling you what I've learned. I'm not representing any indigenous nation in particular, but I truly believe that they have a message that we need to listen to. We can talk about the future. We can all have grand plans for being the best and the brightest and making the most money. But at the same time, and we talk about inclusion. But I think it's really important to consider inclusion from their perspective as well, and make sure that when we do go forward boldly into the future, that we're incorporating the knowledge of the past, and it's not just our way or the highway. So just in closing, absolutely, skills change lives. I would also say that skills can save lives, like they did for my ancestors. But at the end of the day, it's when you share those skills that you can change the world. And that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. So one thing I'm really interested listening to you, you talk about that kind of that circular relationship within the community and knowledge coming from parents to their children and down. When you look in the Western world, the world outside the indigenous communities, do families do that in the same way? Do training systems pass on the knowledge in the same way, or is there something missing there that we should be learning about?
Well, and I'm going to speak for my own personal experience in Canada, not speaking for the rest of the world, obviously. But I believe that in Canada, generations ago, most of us were agrarian. We grew up on farms. Most of us would have parents that grew up on a farm or grandparents. I personally grew up on a farm, but that's disappearing. And for those of us who did grow up in a farming, more rural environment, you learn many, many skills because you have to learn skills. And it's those actual skills that set you up for life. I went on, became a lawyer and so forth, but I believe that anything I really learned of any value, I learned on the farm when I was young. It taught me how to solve problems. It taught me how to build, how to critical thinking, frankly, as a child, which I think is really valuable. But today, very, very few young people have that experience. Their parents are working. They go to school for their learning, and frankly, that's mostly books. It's not, or Facebook on the internet. They're not really getting that hands-on experience that is more than a job down the road. It's making them useful citizens, whatever they end up doing. And I think that's been lost to a great extent, certainly in the Canadian workforce.
And interesting, just making a connection as you were speaking, you're talking about growing up in a rural community and having to learn those skills, and the indigenous community, and then of course we heard from Scott Kelly and Sergei Krikalev this morning, is if you're up in space, you have to have all those skills, so you have that need to develop the skills yourself, and perhaps in the industrialized world we're becoming less and less able to develop those skills because things are a little too easily available for us.
Yeah,
perhaps that will change.
I think that's a mistake. I think we need to step back and think about why skills are so important. And it's not just about the newest technology and the next great job. It's that ability to learn in an applied learning setting, which is so valuable and is getting lost.
Right. Thank you. Anybody like to ask questions? No? None of our Russian colleagues have some questions? So many similarities. I live in Canada. I've been coming to Russia for 2.5 years. There are many similarities between your countries. Yeah, thank you, sir. Okay.
Yes, thank you for your story. It's really inspiring. But I think about one point. When your ancestors approach in North America, they have no suitable skills for that environment, and native people could help them with suitable skills. And my question is, do you think that nowadays our environment is really changed, and now we are living in new digital environment, and some basic skills, some basic approach, some basic concepts we need to change, or we just can't survive in that new environment? And my question is, do you believe that we have some skills or some mindsets or some concepts that are not related to time, to area, to something really eternal?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are concepts that are basic concepts that, regardless of the age we live in, are absolutely essential for happy, successful, fulfilling lives. And one of them is relationships, the ability to maintain relationships, and again, sharing of skills. I think it's particularly easy in North America to focus only on the individual. And I think it's very important to share what you know with the person next to you, because that's what builds community. So the whole concept of relationship and interconnectivity, I think, is an essential skill, frankly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abigail. So our final contributor today is Marcel Hedayat, who was born in Kabul. She left Afghanistan when she was 3 and came to the UK. She's, in her adult life, has set up an app, Chatterbox, which I'm really particularly intrigued with this one, which matches language learners with refugee tutors who share their professional backgrounds and interests for more engaging, relevant, and effective learning. Thank you, Marcel. Try again. There we go. Yeah.
There you go. So just to repeat, my name is Marcel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Chatterbox, which, as Crispin said, matches language learners with refugee tutors. And I'll go a bit back into the past, like Abigail, and say that the story behind our startup actually began in Afghanistan with my mum Patuni, who had been a successful civil engineer who spoke English and 3 other languages fluently. So this is a woman who was set up for life, supposedly. Unfortunately, she couldn't have predicted that the Taliban would take over her country and that she would be forced to leave and abandon not just her social connections and her physical possessions, but also her professional identity. So arrived in the UK with 2 young children, she had a difficult time to reintegrate, or at least she had lost the ability to practice as a civil engineer because the UK didn't accept her qualifications. She had become immersed in an environment that she had absolutely no idea how to navigate, a new culture, a new way of working, new job titles, all of it. And then finally, she'd lost that real asset that we all have in finding work, which is our professional networks. Unfortunately for my mother, she's an incredible woman, and she managed to transform her skills into something useful, specifically her language skills. So she trained first as an interpreter and then as a language teacher, and today she's the head teacher of her own school. So my mum's journey is a journey shared by refugees all over the world who, for me, are incubators of agile learning and agility in the labor market. And I think that they share a number of similarities with young people today who are looking into the future and not knowing exactly what it will hold for them in terms of employment. So to quote a few figures, 65% of children in primary school today will end up in jobs that don't exist yet, that we don't know how to train them for. And we know, for example, that 375 million workers will become redundant from their jobs in the middle of their careers. So in this world, how can we train the workers of tomorrow? And so in my work Chatterbox, I've learned from refugees. I learned from my mother's experience and have now built a language school that employs and trains refugees to become language tutors in their native languages. And so on our digital platform today, we have engineers who learn Arabic from Syrian engineers. We have aid workers who learn Spanish from Venezuelan medical doctors. And of course, there's incredible value created for the refugee as well as the language learner. And the great thing about our model is that it can actually be applied to help people outside of the refugee community. So we're looking next to helping people who experience similar displacement from the labor market. Think of parents, specifically mothers, who are forced out of their jobs and find it impossible to get back into work. People who become disabled, people who lose their jobs from automation. So as you can see, I constantly see stories of labor market transformation of refugees. And I think that we could learn a lot from them. We can learn a lot from someone like Muna, who was an architect in Syria and is now a full-time Arabic teacher. Or Nazir, who was a maths professor at Kabul University and is now a business manager. Or even John, who was a politician in Colombia and is now a performance artist. What can we learn from these people? Well, I've come to share with you 3 lessons that I've learned myself. And the first is that in the future, we need to learn a lot. And so we need to love to learn. Refugees are role models of lifelong learning because they have a true appreciation of the power of learning. It's something that I got from my mother. It's something that every refugee teaches their child and adopts themselves. And so my question to you is, does our education system today genuinely transfer a love of learning in young people? I'll leave that to you, for you to answer. Second, I think that what we can learn from refugees is the ability to recognize and develop timeless skills. This is a concept that someone in the audience mentioned earlier. There are certain skills that are useful no matter the place and time. At Chatterbox, we recognize that language skills are one of these skills that are useful anywhere in the world. You can become a language teacher. What are the skills are timeless? I would argue interpersonal relationships and communication, mathematics, self-management, grit and resilience. Are we teaching young people these skills today, or are we focusing too much on skills like qualifications? And finally, every refugee who becomes displaced has to rebuild their professional networks. And from what I've seen, the ones who are successful have a broad and diverse social and professional network that they can call on to be inspired, to hear about the 60% of jobs that are never advertised, and only advertised in professional networks. So how can we help young people today develop diverse and expansive social and professional networks to assist them as their professional environments change and adapt? And so in sum, there are 3 major lessons that I think we can all learn from refugees to help us adapt to the 4th industrial revolution. The first is to develop a love for learning and to share a love of learning in schools and to young people. The second is to develop timeless skills that will be a briefcase of tools that we can use no matter where we go and in whatever context we're using our skills. And the final one is to develop diverse and expansive social networks. We can and we should learn from refugees. And these are a few of the lessons that I've learned along the way.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm not going to quite let you get off the hook, though, about does the education system foster a love of learning? I mean, what is your view on that in your experience? Because it sounds you've talked a lot about your mother, so it sounds as though a lot of your love of learning came through your mother.
Oh gosh, yeah. My mother was a classic Asian tiger mum. She really, really emphasized the value of teaching. She was like, after God, the thing I want you to love most is your education because it's so valuable. I'm not going to do the typical thing of trashing education and teachers, although we all know that the education system is not set up for the economy to come and the economy of now. But what I will say actually is, are teachers empowered? Do they have the time? Do they have the energy to actually inspire a love of learning in their students? In the UK at least, Crispin, I'm sure you know that teachers are overworked and underpaid massively. And so if we want them to be the inspirational spark of a future generation, have we really given them the tools and the capacity to do so? So I think this is also something that parents can do, of course, but I would definitely advocate a radical transformation of education. I think some of these soft skills will be far more important in the future than any of the hard skills that we can teach today.
Great, thank you. Would you like to ask Marcel some questions?
I think I said everything
You
clearly.
said everything. All done. Okay, well, in which case, let's have a bit. We've got a little bit more time left. We've got sort of 10 minutes left, and I think it would be great to have. There's very, very different stories that we've heard, but I think there's some kind of themes that have run through this, and I do want to come back. We talked a bit about it. This idea of the future and the past, and that kind of connection between the future and the past. And Shalini, as you hear these other stories, and you're working with communities, have you got any observation on that relationship? You're taking very sort of state-of-the-art technology into communities that are still rooted in the past.
So maybe can I comment some of the?
Yeah, please feel free. Yeah, go on.
I think the main thing is that you're talking about the skills that no time, and so besides sorry,
It's okay.
maybe jet lag just hit me, sorry.
That's no problem at all. So gone.
So what I'm saying is that I started to learn about how to grow food, how to build a house. So I think I agree with we have to go back to the past and learn from the past, and not just to use the technology that for today, right? So thinking about how to survive also throughout the. So part of the community that we learn is that the question that I didn't express is before that I asked that what would their life be differently if we give them electricity? Would it be ruined because they watch the stuff on TV? Is that good for them or not? Or should we just leave them alone so they can live their life peacefully and then use the resources they have, right? So that was a big question to me personally. But again, what we can do is to offer them, and they can turn us down, and now they have to be part of it by paying, right? So that's their options too. So that was the question, do we give them the good options or not? So in the end, I think they should have the right to choose which one is good for them.
Okay. And Abigail, you were nodding the whole way through that. Is a similar story, completely the other side of the world as well?
Yeah, absolutely. They invite us in, and they will tell us what they need and what they want. And there's an expression they use which is called two-eyed seeing, where you have two cultures that come together, and you look at a situation from both perspectives, and hopefully come out with something better, having benefited from each other. But I think it has to be. It can't be us going in and saying this is what you should do because it's what works for us. It has to be a conversation, and it has to be a mutual conversation and equal bargaining power. Which is a tricky thing. It's a concept in law that's very hard to come up with. But you have to come together as equals and decide what's best.
And have a skills exchange. I mean, that's what you're talking about, Marcel, isn't it? A kind of a real skills exchange between people who've come and are finding a new life with people who exist in the West, huh?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, Aleksey.
Yeah. I would add that this is absolutely the same situation we have, not just between cultures, nations, but between generations.
Yep.
Because when you start to do project with kids, with young people, with different cultural codes, like being online constantly, being bound to your devices and talking with meme languages, not just with traditional linguistic constructions, but you are in the same situation. You have to be open as a tutor, as a teacher, you have to be open to this new audience and teach from them and give them something you can do. So it's almost the same, yeah.
And I think one thing that's also struck me just listening to you all is how central community is in obviously in learning a skill, but in really getting that change. That change also comes through a sense of community. Is there anything there that you'd like to, especially I guess from the refugee perspective and the way that refugee communities often stick together, how important is that in the work that you've been doing?
Well, the refugee community is diverse, expansive, and so I wouldn't say that there's a community of refugees, but what we do see is that...
But a series of individual communities.
Definitely, exactly.
That's the point I was trying, yeah.
Definitely. So around the world, I think you can see communities of refugees from the same backgrounds coming together, sharing skills, sharing knowledge with each other. And I guess one of the problems, and I haven't gone too much into the problems of refugee integration because I wanted to focus more on what they're doing well. But one of the problems is that they tend to form clusters of social networks that they then share job opportunities with. These clusters are not penetrated enough by people who are part of their host communities. So this is why you get traditional, this type of community of refugees in this country is pretty much very well associated with certain kinds of work, because our communities and our social networks, as I describe them, are where we get our inspiration and our knowledge about work. And so if our communities are too isolated or not diverse enough, then we can ourselves become stuck in certain kinds of work, which makes us vulnerable to any changes in our environment. And so I would say communities are fantastic tools to share knowledge, to learn from and to transfer skills, but that we should try as far as possible to make these communities porous and to make them diverse and interconnected, because sure, we can look, using your example, we could potentially look back and say, sure, they might be happy at the level of skill or the level of the living standards that they're accustomed to, but they should be given a choice. We should open up our innovation, our toolkit of innovation, and give them the choice to adopt certain kinds of innovation or certain kinds of skills or not. So my advocacy would be to definitely, communities can and should be built to transfer knowledge and transfer skills, but that these communities should communicate with one another, they should be open to one another, they should share amongst themselves as well.
And do you think, any of you really, I'm looking at Aleksey because you're very focused on kind of high-tech things, but do you think that the way we're going with digital and digital communities, which to me at least, maybe I'm too old, but they don't feel so porous, it feels like we're sort of going against that idea. Is that something you'd agree with? Do you think that lack of a human factor could be an issue?
Well, I think that there are such factors, but also we have new factors of new types of community, like being internationally open, being multi-connected. When you are multitasking, talking with many other people in the same time. So there are so many features of new kind of communities that we cannot say that we lose something, but yes, we can say that we lose something, but we gain something from new kinds of communities.
I totally agree. Downstairs right now, there's an exhibition put on by young people from Russia, and I was struck by how similar they are to young people in the UK, how similar they are to young people in America, because the connections are being made, and sure, there's siloing of certain political perspectives and certain kind of there are niche domains that people might know about or not, but there's kind of a harmonization of knowledge around the world, which I think is absolutely fascinating through this online community, which makes it more important than ever for people to be connected and have access to it.
So I'll just add a little comment in there. I don't think it's either or necessarily, but I will point out in Canada, which is fairly high-tech place, the highest unemployment rate in Canada is with youth. And they're all tech savvy, no doubt about it, but they don't know how to get a job. They don't have the basic essential skills to be
employable. And, so there's something missing there, that's all I'm saying.
Because technology can't teach you some of these timeless skills. It can't teach you to build relationships. It can't teach you to talk to someone in real life. So there's a balance.
So it's either or. I think they have to exist together. We just don't want to. We need a balance.
Great, thank you all very much, and we're delighted, and more people have come in during the course of this conversation. We're delighted that you've joined us to hear these 4 inspirational skill stories, and as I said at the start, there are another 1,300 inspirational skill stories in our competitors, a similar number of experts, our sponsors, who are all deeply involved with skills and all have very strong stories to tell you and us all about how skills change lives. So please, while you're here, seek them out, learn more about the work that World Skills is doing, but also fundamentally the importance of learning a skill to get your own economic independence and to transform your own life. Thank you for joining us.